Wrestling is chock full of what-ifs, those times in history where we look back and wonder what the alternate timeline would be like if only so-and-so wasn't injured, or if only so-and-so was more available, or if the booker made a different decision at the last minute. As a child of the Attitude Era, I find myself looking back at that time period and asking that question a lot. Needless to say, there are a lot of points in those retrospective DVDs and documentaries that could have been a lot different. And this week, I'm going to rank them the top 8 what-ifs of the Attitude Era. Number 8. What if Mike Tyson weren't involved at WrestleMania 14? If you played through the showcase mode in WWE 2K16, you already knew what would have happened. The role of Mike Tyson would have been played by a random Asian dude named the Enforcer. Truly a launching pad to superstardom. But seriously, Tyson's presence lent the WWF instant credibility just as they were beginning to reclaim their foothold in the wrestling world. One of pop culture's biggest bad boys was part of a main event featuring 2 wrestlers with deplorable attributes of their own. It was a match made in heaven. You can thank Tyson's looser schedule for his Mania involvement. He got suspended from the sport of boxing in 1997 after taking a piece out of Evander Holyfield's ear. Had that not happened, he might still have been in the heavyweight title scene and therefore might not have been available. So how would things have been different? Quite frankly, I don't think the main event for WrestleMania 14 would have been looked on as fondly as it is now, and I don't think the show would have been as successful. It's true that the buy rate for the show more than tripled what WrestleMania 13 had done, and while you can argue the company's overall creative direction was the biggest reason, there's no doubt in my mind that Tyson helped push them over the edge. Iron Mike gave the company the attention they desperately needed at a time when their future was still very much in doubt. Austin Michaels on its own would have still delivered, but much like with Donald Trump at 23 and The Rock at 27, all eyes were on Tyson and helped lend credence to the idea that celebrities sell tickets. But none of that would have amounted to a hill of beans if... Number 7. What if Shawn Michaels refused to lose to Steve Austin? Legend has it that even though Shawn Michaels was about to enter a 4-year retirement due to back injury, he still had no intention of dropping the WWF title to Steve Austin on the company's biggest stage. Enter The Undertaker and his taped fists. So let's pretend that Shawn, in the height of his pre-born-again douchiness, used his stroke to keep from passing the torch to Steve Austin, either by having the match end in a no contest, or by just beating Steve Austin outright. Simply put, that would have spelled disaster for the company's future. With a less than satisfying ending to one of the most hyped-up main events in Mania history, right when the WWF needed Austin to look good, doing the exact opposite of that would have made everyone look foolish. How strong would the new face of the company look if he couldn't make good on his promises? How lame would Michaels look pulling the same Lost My Smile garbage he did back in 1997? What would Mike Tyson have done in all this? Just stand there looking like an idiot while taking a bite out of Triple H's elbow? It's a good thing that common sense prevailed and that the Austin era got its official start at WrestleMania 14. Otherwise, all that momentum the company had built up would likely have been lost. Number 6. What if Owen Hart hadn't died? It's one of wrestling's greatest tragedies, Owen Hart falling to his death at the Over the Edge pay-per-view in 1999. But had the show gone according to plan, if Owen was able to get on the ground safely and wrestle the Godfather and win the Intercontinental Championship, then what? Let's pretend for a minute that the Blue Blazer became the IC champion. They likely would have continued the Owen is not the Blazer ruse that had been going on for weeks, even though the jig was already kind of up. I'm guessing Owen would have eventually ditched the facade and wrestled as himself once again, but where would Jeff Jarrett figure into this? The two were a tag team at the time of Owen's death, and Jarrett eventually won the title from Godfather as a tribute. Perhaps they would have broken up over the title and/or the services of Deborah. Would Owen have gone on to win the WWF title before retiring? I'm not sure. It would have been nice, but considering Steve Austin held a grudge against Owen for injuring him at SummerSlam 97, and considering Austin was a champion for a lot of those last couple of years before Owen planned on retiring, I think politics would have gotten in the way. And here's some food for thought. In this alternate timeline where Owen and Jeff are fighting for the Intercontinental title, would that have prevented Chyna from winning the belt in the fall of that year? Remember, she won the belt from Jarrett, who might not have had the belt at all if Owen hadn't died. Which brings me to another what if. Number 5. What if Chyna became WWF champion? If the rumors are to be believed, for one brief, fleeting moment in 1999, there was talk of giving Chyna the World Championship at SummerSlam, but the creative team pumped the brakes on that idea and gave her the Intercontinental title later that year instead. But what if the company were actually crazy enough to do it? If there was a good time to go batshit insane and put the WWF's most prestigious championship on a woman, 1999 was it. Chyna was white hot at that point, having been the first woman to enter the Royal Rumble and the King of the Ring tournament. Though she wasn't the greatest wrestler in the world, like that ever stopped anyone, she had the stage presence and the physique for a world title run to make sense. I think Chyna winning the championship would have made for some interesting TV. She could have had some fun matches, like against Triple H because of their history, X-Pac just as he was becoming this detested heel, even a short feud with The Rock or Billy Gunn could have been good. But even if they did pull the trigger on a Chyna world title run, I can't imagine it would have lasted very long. At the most, it would have gone to the next pay-per-view, but more realistically, it would have only lasted a week or two just to pop the ratings. And much like her time with the Intercontinental title, I can't imagine she would have stayed in the hunt very long after losing it. While making Chyna the first female WWF champion in '99 could have been a little too much too soon, I don't think it would have hurt the business. There was never going to be another time it could believably happen, and looking at today's landscape, I doubt there ever will be again. Number 4. What if Shane Douglas was part of the Radicalz? One of the biggest turning points for the Monday Night War was when Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, and Perry Saturn jumped ship en masse from WCW to the WWF in 2000. But what some fans might not know is that the original combination was supposed to be, well, a little more franchisey. Shane Douglas was part of a group of WCW workers who were upset about Kevin Sullivan replacing Vince Russo as head writer. Eventually, Douglas, Benoit, Malenko, Guerrero, and Saturn were negotiating with the WWF as a collective unit. But in the move that should have surprised no one with even limited knowledge of Dean's bridge-burning abilities, the French fries was left hanging by his comrades. By his own admission, Dean had the least bargaining power of the 5 of them, so he understood why they left him in WCW. But had the whole group made it to Stamford at once, I think he would have made a huge impact. For starters, him being a former ECW champion would have lent the group some extra credibility. As he did with the Revolution in WCW, I believe he would have made a good official leader since he was arguably the best talker of the group. And even though Benoit would have probably still been put in the world title picture before him, Douglas would have still been a great addition to the IC title scene, leaving Malenko and Saturn to fight for the tag titles, and Eddie the European title. Considering Douglas's purported gift for causing problems backstage everywhere he went, I can't imagine he would have stayed in the company for very long, but if the original WCW quintet had stayed intact, who knows how much more of a force they could have been. Number 3. What if Dr. Death had won the Brawl for All? As I've mentioned on this show, the Brawl for All was 6 shades of stupid. Putting a bunch of shoot fights in the middle of a scripted wrestling program did nothing to help ratings or career trajectories. One of the biggest victims of this silly tournament was journeyman Dr. Death Steve Williams, who seemingly had the most to gain from winning, but one torn hamstring and a knockout punch later, and Williams became an afterthought. But suppose Dr. Death did beat Bart Gunn and go on to win the tournament like everyone named Jim Ross wanted. What would have happened? Well, for starters, maybe Williams would have been put in that title program with Steve Austin. The only question is, when? It wouldn't have been right after the Brawl for All ended around SummerSlam, because Austin would lose the title at Breakdown the following month. It could have taken place in between Austin's feuds with The Rock and Undertaker in the spring of '99, but it probably would have only been a 1-month deal. But if Williams spent the whole 9 to 10 months beating everyone up, avoided the whole Butterbean fight entirely, then challenged Austin for the title, that could have drawn huge money. If the Austin program had never materialized, they still could have used this tournament victory as a chance to show everyone just how legitimately tough Dr. Death was. Had he not been injured, had he won the tournament, he could have eked out a nice little career for himself in the WWF. But one thing's for sure, no matter what would have happened after he won, there still wouldn't have been another Brawl for All. Number 2. What if Vince Russo had never left the WWF? On a cold October night in 1999, head writer Vince Russo and his colleague Ed Ferreira ditched the WWF much like how the Colts fled Baltimore, and they ran to the shiny shores of Indianapolis. Wait, I'm sorry, I meant WCW. Sorry, I'm really screwing my analogy up right now. Anyway, the thought was, since Vince was the head writer as the WWF was becoming dominant, surely he could have worked his magic with WCW, right? Well, for many reasons, the least of which was the writing, that didn't exactly pan out. But suppose Russo and Ferreira did stay with the WWF, how would that company have been affected? And furthermore, what would have happened to WCW? As far as the WWF's content was concerned, I would imagine there would have been a lot more of the same kind of storylines that had gone on before Russo left, an emphasis on crash TV and reality-based gimmicks that might have offended a few sensibilities here and there. But some said that 2000 was an even better year for the company when Chris Kresge took over the writing duties. Would the WWF have been able to reach those lofty heights that fans look back at so fondly if Russo stuck around? We may never know. Vince's departure left the F scrambling to come up with solutions to some of the long-term storylines he began. Like, was Rikishi really the guy who ran over Stone Cold? And was Triple H really going to be the one to crash Stephanie and Test's wedding? Perhaps those stories would have ended differently had Russo stuck around. How would WCW have fared without Russo's guidance? Well, I argue they would have actually done worse. When Russo was writing for them, the ratings pretty much stayed consistently in the 3s. Once he was out of power, they dropped to the 2s or below. Question is writing all you want, but at least people kept tuning in. Also, I think that if Russo had never switched sides, history would look much kinder upon him today. He was kind of exposed as head writer of WCW, but if he had stayed with the WWF the whole time, I think fans would have been more forgiving of his more questionable ideas. Though Russo does have a bevy of supporters to this day, I can't help but think he would have even more now if he had never switched sides during the Monday Night War. And the number 1 what if of the Attitude Era is, what if Vince McMahon wasn't the higher power? It's considered one of the lamest and most anticlimactic payoffs to a storyline in history. The Undertaker and his Ministry of Darkness were led by this mysterious higher power, and then when the reveal finally came, it was just Vince McMahon under a hood. It turned what started out as a very interesting storyline into something very illogical and full of plot holes. So who would have been a more logical substitute? To many fans over the years, the obvious answer is Jake Roberts. After all, the Snake had a history with the Undertaker dating back to the early 90s, and his loss to Steve Austin at the King of the Ring in 1996 was a major turning point for the Rattlesnake, thus providing a motive. Add in the fact that Jake would have cut some sweet-ass evil promos as the higher power, and the story practically writes itself. But let's be honest, unless the Diamond Dallas Page of today could go back in time and clean them up with yoga, Jake in a high-profile role in the company was out of the question. Remember, Heroes of Wrestling happened around the same time. Do you really want this guy to be the one under the robe?
You want to play 21?
I've seen other fan theories that feature guys like Ted DiBiase and the Ultimate Warrior, but other than Vince McMahon, I guess, Jake the Snake was the only one who could have filled that role effectively. Without going into full-on fantasy booker mode here, I think this could have been a really interesting angle. Imagine Austin and McMahon forming this unlikely partnership, battling Jake the Snake and The Undertaker over control of the company and the championship, with a young Stephanie McMahon caught in the middle. Instead, we got a continuation of the Austin McMahon feud, which, okay, yeah, that's fun and all, but I feel it could have used a fun little diversion. A higher power storyline with a cool payoff might not have done huge business for the company, but I think it would have at least been more satisfying to watch. I suppose it's a good thing the cards fell where they did. After all, if Vince never was the higher power, we never would have got this gem.
It's me, Austin! Oh, son of a bitch!
Got any other what ifs of this time period? Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to thumbs up this video if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.